So thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Dawn Dole, and I'm the Executive Director for the Taos Institute. This is a forum call today, September 15th, 2021, and the forum calls are sponsored and hosted by the Taos Associate Council. The council is made up of 12 people that are Taos associates who participate and plan this kind of program. Sometimes they're strictly for Taos associates, but today we wanted to invite our guests and colleagues and students to join us also in this amazing topic we're about to explore, writing translingual poetry. And the Taos Institute is a nonprofit educational organization for those of you who do not know us and you're new today and a guest today. We focus on looking at how through social construction and relational practice, we create the world we want to live in. So the multiple voices, the many views, creating dialogic spaces, collaborative spaces, and appreciative spaces for people to gather and explore and create the world we most want to live in. So our tagline is changing the world one conversation at a time. So this is an important conversation we're having this morning, and poetry is a wonderful way for us to delve into these ideas. Jerry Gale is the person who coordinated this forum call today and invited Misha to join us. So I am going to turn it over to Jerry, but before I do that, Jerry, we've got some people joining in. If you're just joining and you didn't hear me say, please introduce yourself in the chat. You can put your name in there, where you are in the world, and one thing that drew you to this call. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dawn. It's a pleasure to see everyone's faces or names, and I invite people to turn on your cameras if you're okay with that. And I want to welcome Misha Cahnmann-Taylor here. And I can do a formal presentation, which I'm not going to do. And I know she plans to post on the chat her website, which she's very happy and pleased with as well. So I invite people to go to her website. And you'll see such things there as her 5 books that she's written, that she's a Fulbright recipient, that she's won awards in the United States for her poetry, and her activism as well here in Athens, Georgia. But how I do want to introduce Misha is as a friend and colleague. I've known Misha for a number of years now, particularly through playfulness in an improvisational theater group that we're in, The Margins. And I know Misha as a creative, generative, talented performer. I also know her as a mother of 2 kids and as a wife, and that she commits herself to all aspects of her life, from her work at the University of Georgia to her family to social action in our community. So it's a real pleasure to invite Misha to present today. One other comment I want to make is her book, Imperfect Tense, which is a book that I've gotten, she wrote it, I believe, back in 2016. And I bought that book and gave it as a gift to my partner, Leah, who's here with me, who is Spanish speaking as well. So it was a great book to share. So with that, Misha, please.
So thank you so much. I feel very lucky to live in the same city some of the time with Jerry and some of the time now with Leah. So it's really great, and to cross languages. When I get a chance, I speak Portuguese with Leah and she tolerates it. Tudo bem, legal, legal. So we have many different nations and languages in the room. I always start my class on bilingualism with introducing myself in terms of my languages of expertise, languages of inheritance, and languages of affiliation. These are terms by Ben Rampton, who's a UK anthropologist of education, I suppose, or linguist, applied linguist. And he's looking at immigrant communities there, saying we need to disrupt this idea of the native speaker, someone who is fluent in only one language, when so many of us, even if we consider ourselves monolingual, in this case, I'm assuming that English is our lingua franca, but that many of us have access not only to other non-English codes, but varieties of English, and are multilingual, multi-dialectal people. And this new term coined by Suresh Kanagaraja on translanguaging, or translingualism, which is another term used by Suresh and also Ofelia Garcia, a Latinx scholar in the US, is just trying to address the fact that all of us are accessing English and non-English codes all the time. And I think we're still tethered to old understandings of L1 and L2, as if that they're like first language, second language are divided, when so many of us are living along this hyphen in between. And how do we take the most advantage of that and allow us to shift into thinking of ourselves as all emergent translingual people? So I've been looking at this as a poet, as a scholar in education, trained in anthropology and ethnographic methods, but also trying to understand what it means to approach things from an arts-based perspective, how to write lyrically in academic prose, and how to bring academic theory and thinking into poetry without burdening it and weighing it down. These are things that are always on my mind. So the ideas that I thought I would talk about today are some very new ideas for me that come with what it means to engage in creative writing as a multilingual person. I will say, I invite you in the chat to describe yourself in terms of your, let's see, what did I say? Inheritance, expertise, and affiliation. And you could just share for yourself. For me, I think of my languages of expertise. I'll start with the middle one. Certainly this context is in English. I was born into an English-speaking household, sort of. And so I grew up speaking English in a Latinx community in Chicago. So I quickly desired learning Spanish, and I took my required foreign language classes and discovered I had distant Jewish cousins in the diaspora in Mexico City, and went to live with them and learned Spanish there, and spent a summer in Salamanca, Spain, and all these different varieties of Spanish. And then inherited the language of my grandparents, that was Yiddish, which they used to hide their conversations from the children and grandchildren, and German, which my grandfather refused to speak after he left in 1936 from Munich, forced exile. So those are some languages of inheritance. And affiliation, I've learned to affiliate with all kinds of languages that are outside of my expertise, Portuguese and Korean through my students, and Chinese, Hebrew, and Arabic are some of my favorites. Also Turkish. I have had many Turkish friends and languages. So I like to disrupt that idea that we're just in one or two because we're fluent, whatever fluency means. And that's a very unstable term. So feel free to, as you drift, Zoom is so wonderful for drifting. If you want to share who you are in terms of your languages. Without further ado, I'm going to share 4 ideas that I have to share with you. And I'm hoping for your good brains to share back with me your thinking as well. But I'll give a pause here in case anybody has any comment before we move on. All right. I can't see you very well now. I'm going to share briefly my screen, but unmute if you want to jump in. This should be as interactive as you like it. We're together, as I understand it, until 12:30. At some reasonable point, I will stop and give you an invitation to write. You'll go away and write and hopefully come back with something creative. I saw in the chat that there were many people looking to enliven their academic writing with poetry, or think about how to bring that in. So hopefully we'll get to that conversation as well. So I hope you didn't see that little sign. Do you see my handout here with 4 translingual moves in poetry? Yeah, great. Okay, so this is rough. Please help me with the language to figure this out. But I'm going to talk about translation in its direct or conventional meaning, remixing languages and old forms, remarking in happy accidents, remixing, and reimagining. These are things I'm noticing in poetry that I'm drawn to and poetry that I'm aiming to write myself as both a scholar and a creative writer. So the first one is pretty straightforward. It's translation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I'm more present with you. So we've all heard about translation. You may know that in the US, and I'm not sure how it is in other English countries, maybe those of you in the UK can speak up about it, but there's very little literature that comes from non-English languages into the English language. Publishing houses in the US don't make a lot of money because the sales are very low for translated works of literature. And so it's increasingly narrow depending on what genre you're looking in. So there's more fiction than there is poetry. There's more poetry than there are plays. There's very little children's literature that comes from non-English authors into the English language. So it's a very rare experience that we get to taste a few writers writing in non-English languages when you're in an English-speaking country. Is this true also for the UK? I'm not sure. Are you, Claire's kind of, nah, might be. Your perceptions on this? Well, for me, it's been woefully rare. I see Talia's maybe going to
Well, I'm saying that because we come from a very small language. Greek is very small language. Everything is translated in Greece. So in that sense, we get lots and lots of input from other languages translated into Greek. And little of what's in Greek is being translated outside Greece.
Yeah, I think that's the advantage of not being in a English language.
But little is translated outside in other languages because, for example, Greece is a country with a lot of poetry. We have Nobel laureates in poetry, Zafaris and Elitis, and I mean we have there's lots of poetry in Greece. Maybe it has roots back into antiquity when there was this famous Greek poetry. So some of this famous poetry is being translated into other languages, especially in English and in French and maybe Spanish a little bit as well. But very little else is being translated. So we're not, our Greek poets have a very limited readership.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the problem. I mean, and you really need all kinds of levels of advocacy to be able to get that right. It's expensive, but now with the web, it's not so expensive. We really can have access to and produce more of the great literature of the world. We just don't. Well, I'll tell you my own experience. I've never been so honored. The experience of being translated myself. I do think of myself as fluent in Spanish. I did live with my relatives in Mexico City and in Spain, and I spent several years, one on Fulbright in Oaxaca, Mexico. I live in between Spanish and English regularly, but it's a whole different level to read, write, and translate poetry into your other language. And I thought I could do it. I worked with my student, Elena Alonso from Spain, who was interested in translating a couple of my poems for a journal there. And so I was helping her because many relate to Mexican cultural concepts and concerns. And I wanted her to get that part right when translating it into the Castilian Spanish Spain context. And then a colleague of mine who writes for a journal in South America, Revista Altazor, asked for some poems. And her name is Khadija Gadum, and she rewrote our translations. And I didn't realize how far away I was, or how I've never felt so alive in my second language as when I read someone translating my English poem into Spanish. And the Spanish was so much better than I could have ever done myself as the writer. I really don't know how to explain it, but I will share are any of you Spanish speakers? Can I have like a reaction or a hand up if you speak Spanish? A few. Okay, so we're just gonna have fun. Just hear the poem in Spanish. I should have asked if you're able to help me read it in Spanish. No sé si alguien me puede ayudar. Alguien voluntario, o tal vez Lía, ¿tú puedes leerlo en voz alta?
Yo puedo también.
¿Quién dice?
No, yo puedo, no, pero Patricia puede. Patricia.
Sale.
Dale.
So maybe Patrice will just read this in Spanish. It's like my poem and not my poem anymore.
Ok. No hubiera pensado en las partículas de arroz, hasta leerlas nombradas de forma indefinida, subtituladas del tagalo, o medir cómo hacen los camboyanos la longitud desde el codo hasta la punta del dedo corazón. Cualquier cantidad de palabras, creo una toma de conciencia. Una roca en Ojibwe contiene el alma del águila calva, así como la en la roca alberga el género. Y decir vaca en polaco es vincular a abuela con pan pascua, metido de manera distinta a la de una rebanada japonesa. Nuestras frases hechas ordenan él, tercera persona, sujeto masculino singular, antes de lleva, verbo, y a ella, objeto indirecto, en su carro. Una pared inanimada de una tonalidad azul desgastada que solo se puede describir en Nueva Guinea, como oscuro o frío. Poco aprendemos a contar en el lenguaje del camarón mantis, cuyos ojos ven en 12 colores primarios en vez de los 3 nuestros. Sistemas lingüísticos de visión, donde espectros enteros se pierden en la traducción. Me gustaría levantar las persianas, sentir que mi sangre se agita como antes y atrapar por la cola los nombres lejanos.
Gracias, estupendo. I mean, I just love hearing it in Spanish. It was so nice. I'm going to read it in English now for those of you that would like to hear it in English. It's just incredible to me the choices that those translators made that helped me see the poem new. And the title, Whorfian Hypothesis, refers to Benjamin Lee Whorf, who's, I guess, most famously interpreted for arguing that indigenous peoples in the territory of the area of Alaska could understand snow better because they had more words to describe qualities of snow. And so if you don't speak the Inuit language or an indigenous language in the Alaskan territory with all these words, you're missing an understanding of snow. So the poem in English is titled Whorfian Hypothesis. I wouldn't have thought rice particles until reading them, unconditionally named, subtitled from Tagalog, or of measuring as Cambodians do the length from elbow to tip of middle finger. Any number of words builds a house of consciousness. One rock, Asin in Ojibwe, contains bald eagle spirit, just as La in La Roca houses gender. And to say babka in Polish is to link grandmother with the loaf served on Easter, counted differently from a Japanese slice. Our idioms order he, third person singular male subject, before drives verb and her, the object, up an inanimate wall whose blue chipped hue can only be described in New Guinea as either dark or cold. Few of us learn to count in the language of mantis shrimps, whose eyes see in 12 primary colors to our 3, whole linguistic systems of sight where spectrums go untranslated. I'd like to lift the blinds, feel my blood stir as it once did, catching faraway nouns by the tail. So that's a bit of my ode to why I love other languages and what they awaken in our soul, just learning a few turns of phrases. I was remarking that in Spanish, in Mexico, when you say push-up, the word is lagartija. So, which is also means is lizard. So a lagartija is a lizard, but it's also the way in Mexico you refer to push-ups, which is just perfect, isn't it? And we don't do that. In English, we don't have that. So when I see a lizard, as I did in my bathtub in Mexico City, it was just catching more than the noun lizard, but catching a whole understanding of a connection that heretofore I had missed. So I do love interviewing people when I do qualitative inquiry who are crossing languages, and those kinds of realizations, I think, wake us up to the potentials in our own language that I don't think that they're not there. We can talk about snow in lots of different ways, but until we know what's possible, it's harder to find the articulations and the language. And I think that's what is so wonderful about poetry, literature, and qualitative inquiry, is finding the words to name what already exists and know to be true. So the next, so that's just translation. So, it's a rich experience. I don't think it's ever going away. A lot of people prefer the word interpretation or interpreter to a translator, understanding that you're never quite, translation has a misleading one-to-one quality, as if you can perfectly map on, I'll never forget my brother-in-law coming to visit me in Mexico. How do you say table? How do you say on? How do you say, and I just kept saying, you can't translate out of context. Like, I need the whole sentence, and then I need more than the sentence to help understand and help you interpret what you want to say, not a word for word translation. So that's exists. We do live in nation state boundaries that are often correlated with languages. And often we are moving from one to another, but sometimes many of us are occupying spaces that are always multilingual, or now often people are using the prefix trans for translingual. We have translation, transportation, the Latin root trans is crossing over. And so, you have transsexual, transgender. I mean, these are things we're trying to disrupt. There's one and one, but there's lots of people, maybe all of us are somewhere in between. So I do a lot with formal poetry, and looking at old forms like, of course, Shakespeare's sonnet or the Petrarchan sonnet. Those are two different 14-line structures that are from the English and Italian languages. The French formal structures of the sestina and the villanelle. And all of this is in a handout that if you didn't receive for having signed up earlier than today, like if you just signed up a moment ago, you may not have received the handout, but I'm just referring to things that you can later find there, or you're more than welcome to have two screens and follow along. I've recently, because of so many students and poets of influence on me from Asia, I have started to study the Jueju form from China and the Tanka form from Japanese through the great poet Kimiko Han. Of course, the ghazal is one of the most, I think, dynamic forms that poets are writing in today, that I largely attribute its growth and interest to Aga Shahid Ali, a Kashmir poet, grew up between Kashmir and Delhi, India, and brought the form into the English language. And I want to share one of his poems in a moment. It's just a beautiful structure that seems to strike a chord with a lot of contemporary writers in the English language, and the Pantoum from Malaysia. So if you're not familiar with these forms, and whether you're an academic or just here because you're interested in multilingualism, I highly recommend looking at each of these forms, reading some of the top poems in the forms. I'll put in the chat, when I'm in doubt and want to look up a form, Poetry Foundation, .org is a trusted resource, and you can put any term in and it will give you the definition of the term. So if you put Pantoum or Sestina, and it'll also teach you something about the structure by giving you examples of poems that are written long ago and today. So the ghazal is a series of, this is my definition. I'm just going to share my screen. This is on your handout. I didn't know if you would prefer to look at your own or look along with me. So you'll look along with me for now. It's a series of semantically independent two-line mini poems that have a strong formal unity. The rhyme refrain, the kafiya radif combination, occurs at the end of both lines of the first couplet, and then at the end of the second line of every couplet that follows. While the rhyme word, and one could argue it's more of a repeated word than a rhyme word, but the rhyme word or the repetitive word will change, the rhyme word precedes the ending word. The rhyme word would change, the rhyme remains the same throughout the ghazal. So in Ali's ghazal here, Arabic, he doesn't rhyme the word that precedes Arabic, as many poets do in the tradition, but he has Arabic, 3 syllables. Maybe that's enough to have as the rhyme. And you'll notice later in a moment, I'll share a poem. I've tried to go closer to that original. Border Spanish, corset to Spanish, implored in Spanglish. Oh, Spanglish, sorry. Discúlpame. The whole poem is about Spanglish original. So I'm trying to work with that or sound here. Abhorred, like Spanglish, ignored, you know. So let's look at a couple of these just for a moment. Would anyone like to read Arabic? It's very powerful to read it in your own voice, and it gives me a break. So I invite one of you to unmute and say, I accept the responsibility of reading this beautiful poem.
I'm willing to read, but in English, not Arabic, correct?
Of course.
Okay, good. Call me Ishmael tonight. The only language of loss left in the world is Arabic. These words were said to me in a language not Arabic. Ancestors, you left me with a plot in the family graveyard. Why must I look in your eyes for prayers in Arabic? Majnun, his clothes ripped, still weeps in his Layla. Oh, this is madness of the desert, his crazy Arabic. Who listens to Ishmael? Even now he cries out, Abraham, throw away your knives, recite a psalm in Arabic. From exile, Muhammad Dawish writes to the world, you'll all pass between the fleeting words of Arabic. At an exhibition of miniatures, such delicate calligraphy, Kashmiri paisley tied into his golden hair of Arabic. The Quran prophesies the fire of men and stones. Well, it's now all come true, as it was said in Arabic. When Lursa died, they left balconies open and saw his gasidas braided on the horizon into knots of Arabic. Memory is no longer confused, it has a homeland, says Shamas. Territorialize each confusion in a graceful Arabic. While there were homes in Deir Yassin, you'll see forests, that villages was raised. There's no sign of Arabic. I too, O Ami Achai, saw the dresses of beautiful women and everything else, just like you, in death, Hebrew, and Arabic. They asked me to tell them what Shahid means. Listen, it means the beloved in Persian, whiteness in Arabic.
Or witness, yeah, beautiful.
Witness.
Quite different meaning, witness
Yes.
in Arabic. So beautiful. So Ali, was in exile himself in I believe in the UK, certainly in English-speaking countries, writing in English, this series of ghazals in his book, Call Me Ishmael Tonight. And I just love the way he's using this old Persian form to interpret bilingual or translingual, transcultural identity and invoking the language of Arabic over and over and over again in English. I think it's an interesting invitation that you might think of following yourself if you have languages of inheritance yourself or languages of expertise. What might your ghazal look like if you are invoking a non-English language through this structure and carrying it with you? Any other things you notice? Do people notice any references? Anyone familiar with Lorca, Amihai, Mahmoud Darwish?
I was struck by the geography.
Say more.
well, because there's Layla, so from a historical perspective, he's traveling. Layla and Lorca are different periods in human history, but also there are references to Quran. So there's reference to Kashmir, and then even pre-Islamic times in Arabic. So it's in a way it's a journey of the language in geography and history.
Beautiful, really beautiful. Thank you. I agree. Yeah, and he's all over the world. Amihai is one of the most famous Israeli poets. Federico Garcia Lorca, of course, in Spain. Yeah, and Darwish. So it's so many different references. So he contains so many worlds in each stanza, which stands separately and unified together in this beautiful form. I highly recommend reading as much of his work as possible. And Ali's ghazals have influenced so many writers, including Natasha Trethewey, I chose a pantoum to just expose you to another form, but her poem that I've linked into the revised handout that you were sent or will be sent if you need it, you'll let Dawn know and she'll send it to you. But Mississippi is her ghazal, and it's just so beautiful. She's the daughter of an African-American woman and a white man in Mississippi in the late 60s. So really difficult time to be in love and in across races in the United States anywhere, but especially in the South, and to be a baby born of that love. She testifies to that experience throughout her gorgeous work. And as an alum of my University of Georgia and a former poet laureate, we're very proud of her. She was a cheerleader at our school and the poet laureate, which is an incredible and unusual combination. She's a pretty remarkable human being. So I highly recommend you read everything. Now she's writing in this old form from Malaysia called the pantoum, where the second line and the fourth line of the first stanza become the first line and the third line of the next. So you'll see that the stanzas are braided together. It's remarkable. So really, if you're starting to write a pantoum, you come up with the first stanza and you've already done half of the next stanza. So it's a very helpful way of moving forward in your poem. And then at the end, the last stanza brings back the first and third lines into the final stanza. So look at this beautiful, memorable poem. You almost don't even know the form because you're so enraptured with the story of the poem. And then when you admire the form, it's just all the better, all the more incredible. So she's not writing across languages, but across the experiences of being both identified as Black and white in the United States throughout her life. And this is one of her many poems that testify to that experience, called Incident. We tell the story every year, how we peered from the windows, shades drawn, though nothing really happened, the charred grass now green again. We peered from the windows, shades drawn, at the cross trussed like a Christmas tree, the charred grass still green. Then we darkened our rooms, lit the hurricane lamps. At the cross trussed like a Christmas tree, a few men gathered, white as angels in their gowns. We darkened our rooms and lit hurricane lamps, the wicks. We tell the story every year. It seems the angels had gathered, white men in their gowns. When they were done, they left quietly. No one came. The wicks trembled all night in their fonts of oil. By morning, the flames had all dimmed. When they were done, the men left quietly. No one came. Nothing really happened. By morning, all the flames had dimmed. We tell the story every year. So it's an obsessive form. It goes back to the moment, did this happen? It didn't, nothing really happened. I didn't imagine it. Do you see how that braided structure works?
Beautiful.
Yeah, just
Beautiful.
beautiful. So I sometimes I'll encourage my students to start, to steal a great opening. We tell the story every year. What are the stories in your lives that your families tell every year, for better and for worse, for more truth or less truth? What happened? So you might even think about picking up this structure to look at your own history and what it reveals about what was told to you as a child, and the truths that then become revealed to you as you get older. So I find forms to be outstanding. One of my favorite teachers was during my MFA work as a poet was with Maxine Cahnmann. I do have one of her gorgeous villanelles hyperlinked here that I'll invite you to look at later. Villanelle is another wonderful structure. It's a 3-line structure. So unlike the pantoum with 4, the villanelle repeats the first and the third lines of the first stanza through the whole poem. And at the end, I'll invite you to try it. It's also a delightful poem, the most famous of which is Elizabeth Bishop's One Art. And if you don't know that poem, I will share it with you. I have shared it, I think, in this handout at the very end. And it's one of my very favorite poems ever written in the English language in the French form of the villanelle. I'm trying to write in form in honor to Maxine, who taught me that, any good poet worth her salt should try to experiment and learn forms and grow. Certainly free verse is open to all of us, but I think it's a muscle to try to practice working within the constraints of form and then see what is liberated by working within these, kind of structures, and when you have to break free. So I've started picking up the ghazal. I see a chat. I'm going to I didn't read it. Dawn, is there anything I should attend to in the chat, or we're good? Okay, great. Just pipe in if there is something. And I'm trying to understand my own judgment of the way Spanish gets dismissed, or the way Latinx Spanish speakers, Spanish sometimes is I guess denigrated by being referred to as Spanglish, less than something that is someone that is semi-lingual because they don't have standard variety proficiency in perhaps either Spanish or English, but they're creating whole new cultures in between. So this is often referred to as Spanglish. Spanglish is the contested term, whether that's demonizing a variety or taking it back. So I'm taking it back. Simón is a kind of slang used, sort of an old term for to say yes, yes man, but it's, sí, which is yes in Spanish, but Simón, coming from the 60s Chicano culture. And yeah, I became a bilingual teacher early in my career in Los Angeles, and I was trying very hard to teach my immigrant Latino students proper Spanish. And when I realized that I was the corset that was binding them to something that maybe wasn't necessary or useful anymore, I decided to write through it. So here it is. If you're not bilingual, just enjoy the sounds that when I pop out of English and into Spanish. Simón Ghazal. A language we'll never learn in classrooms, Spanglish. First or second language, both and borders Spanglish. Standard English, a blazer-dressed distant uncle. Tia Castellana, a black-laced corset to Spanglish. Puro amor, tattooed on a gangster's knuckles. What recourse nos queda, implored in Spanglish. El Paso, Las Cruces, La Brea, indelible stains, tarring place names in original Spanglish. Implicated in languages born in exile, Yid, Chingle, Hingle, and Konglish, abhorred like Spanglish. When certain consonants appear between vowels, mojado, mojao, they're ignored in Spanglish. El Poeta writes kulocracy, governing culos, a neologism tour de force in Spanglish. Tranquila, Melisa, conjugating struggles easy, hang out, o hanguear mejor in Spanglish. I forgot to say that one of the things in the Chazal, oh, thank you very much. At the end, the last stanza should invoke the poet's name. So that's why Shahid was mentioned in Ali's poem. What did he say? He said, Shahid means listen. It means the beloved in Persian, witness in Arabic. So yeah, you get to speak to yourself in the Chazal form in the last stanza. It's a really wonderful form. And again, that repetition gives you something to work towards. So if you're obsessed, as many of us are who are thinkers, creatives, scholars, think about what is your obsession, what's the line you can't stop thinking about, or the word, and see if you can put it into one of these forms. And maybe if you open up to surprise yourself, this is where I think academics get into real trouble, because we think we're taught to know what we're studying. And poets and creatives and artists are taught to go into to seek out surprise in what we don't yet know. And I think that is an interesting tension in between the mindset of the artist and the mindset of the scholar. And it's a happy, delicious encounter when they can be together in the same room or the same genre, or in this case, the same poem. So we're moving right along. The next thing I've noticed in poems that I love is when we harvest access to more than one language or more than one dialect or code or convention, we see and remark happy accidents. You know, a lot of times when we're more than proficient in more than one language and operating in different linguistic systems or conventions, whether it's high and low versions of Arabic or different languages altogether, we start to notice error. But I'm trying to, my whole life, I think, is to rethink what error means when moving between codes or languages, and to start to see that as not restricted to being negative error, but a window of opportunity into how the systems function differently. And those can also be insights into a different cultural way of thinking and expand my own. So in the same language, I just love this poem by Malcolm Lowry called Strange Type. And I'm going to read it because it's important to read the words. He's looking at mistakes in typing. So it's not between languages, but between oral and print, right? So notice the cleverness, and let's talk about which words he's remarking at the end. Strange type. I wrote in the dark cavern of our birth. The printer had it tavern, which seems better. But herein lies the subject of our mirth, since on the next page death appears as dearth. So it may be that God's word was distraction, which to our strange type appears destruction, which is bitter. What words do you notice? What do you see? Just put them in the chat if you would. I'm gonna stop sharing. Maybe take a look right now and see if you've got it. I have to stop the sharing so I can see what you say. Ooh, Greg has a comment here. I had a very culture-centric reaction to the title of Arabic. Call Me Ishmael is the start of Moby Dick, I think. My connection is unreliable today, so please excuse me if I have to rejoin. Okay, Greg, thank you. I like that connection. Bitter, better. Isn't that wonderful? Pamela, oh my God, which is bitter at the end, because we know that he's already referred to which seems better in line 2, and that the strange type for the God's words that he mixes up. So great. I love it. I love it. Yeah, yeah. Anything else stand out to you? Tavern. Lowry was known for his interest in alcoholic beverages. That's great. I wrote in the dark cavern of our birth, the printer had it tavern, which seems better. Yes, To a drinker, that would seem much better than cavern. Very nice. And that sets it off. Isn't that a wonderful, happy noticing? You could just be pissed off at your printer for having a mistake, but instead he harvests from the mistake and he goes on to rhyme, blaming the printer versus himself. Exactly. Herein lies the subject of our mirth. And I love how formal that quality is, since on the next page, death appears as dearth. And you can just see how this spins out of control. So, into such joy in mistakes. And if there's nothing else, those of us who are crossing languages and dialects and genres and conventions all the time, we're often embarrassed by mistakes. We feel shame. And I think it's a beautiful thing that translingual writers can do, or poets in general can do, artists can do, is point out to release us from that shame and to find the joy in the error. And that maybe that's the whole point. So this poem by Zafar Kunial is so beautiful that way. I think maybe I'll let him read it for us. I'm not sure if you'll, let me see if, can you see my two screens now? No, probably not. But I wonder if I play the sound, if you'll be able to hear him reading his own poem. Let's try it. And Dawn, give me a this if you hear him speaking, okay?
The word. I couldn't tell you now what possessed me to shut some out and stay in my room, or at least attempt to, in bed mostly. It's my dad standing in the doorframe, not entering, but pausing to shape advice that keeps coming back. Whatever is matter must enjoy the life. He pronounced this twice, and me, I heard wrongness in putting the before life. In two minds, ashamed, aware that I knew better, though was stuck inside while the sun was out, that I'm native here in a halfway house, like that sticking word, that definite article, half right, half wrong, still present between enjoy and life.
God, isn't that ridiculously awesome? I just think, and I invite you to meditate. I'm going to give you some time in a moment to separate and write. Oh, sorry, this is Ocean Vuong reading. Oh, I've stopped him now. Sorry, bye, Ocean. Think in your mind, and if you have a piece of paper nearby or a computer or something to jot it down if something occurs to you, when you were aware of someone, some of yourself or someone you love's mistakes in language or errors or differences. I think as children, young adults, we become heightened to the ways our language or the language of our loved ones can become strange, perhaps even a point of ridicule. Those are little gifts to you as the writer and thinker of what was meaningful when a word choice or a phoneme, when a funny sound. I'll never forget my grandmother, a Yiddish speaker, would always mistake the S and the Z sound. So she would ask if we wanted a zip of her Coke or something like that. And it drove me crazy and it embarrassed me. But now it became generative for a poem in my adult life. So I would say, as those things occur to you, don't lose them. Keep them as notes. Maxine Kumin used to say to me, even if it doesn't become a poem, it's a moment to add to your bone pile. So she said, always collect those things. That's why being a qualitative researcher, someone who's used to writing field notes or journalistic notes, a journal, that those are spaces to collect these things that can become the bones of a future piece of writing or a future piece of thinking, that those things, if you don't document them, they can sail out the window of the moment. But if you have a habit, a practice of writing things down, that these can then become relevant literally or as metaphors for other thinking and writing. So let's see, I have more poems to share, but I think in this point in time, because I want to get you writing, I had another poem there, but I'm not going to share it at the moment. Maybe it'll come back, but I wanted to share this amazing poem that I just came across not long ago from a poet named Duji Tahat, who I don't know. Let's see if I can find a way to share it. I don't know what is going to share that screen. Let's see. Let me get out of here for a moment. Sorry, I have so many screens open and I don't know. I want to see this one. Okay, great. Do you see Salat to be read right to left on your screen? I think it's important to hear him read it and to see it at the same time. It's super confusing because I don't know if any of you are familiar with Arabic or Hebrew, I think even Japanese, yeah, that you read from, this is my right to left versus left to right. And it's that shift in script is a cultural shift. And when you're living between systems, he's illustrating it by writing his poem and you have to read from right to left. So you'll start that first line, he'll read, "My uncle sends me Facebook messages." Do you see what I'm saying? So you have to shift to read it. And I think this is just such an exquisite example of someone who, you know, I don't know if Duji is completely fluent in Arabic, semi-fluent, but he's bringing us that feeling of the Arabic script and text into the English language. And I think it's remarkable. So let's see if we can hear him. I'm not sure. Oh, I want him to read it. Oh, I don't know why it's not doing it. Terrible. Is there any Arabic speaker here by any chance? If there is, would you say yes? It's much better to be read in Arabic-ish with an Arabic. Nadir, are you unmuting because you know Arabic or no?
I can give it a go, yeah. I know Arabic.
Okay, super, because it'd be much worse in my, would you be able, so you have to read it. You would read alone, like, I don't know how to say this word, but it's after this poet who also wrote in this form. And each line you have to start on the right, moving left. Would you give it a try and read the title first, if you would?
Sure. Salat to be read from right to left by Duj Tahat, Hilal Marwa after. Adhan. My uncle sends me Facebook messages. I barely understand. Facebook translator does not apply the images. One starts with ha. He writes, "I love you, Ammu." Standing. In my Friday clothes, the homie sees me as he skips. School, the mosque is just a house round the corner from second period algebra. Bowing. Hovering over my phone, I'm searching why Habibi and not Habibi, as if Pop's name weren't on the line. Prostration. In this wooden house of God, it's Dunajat Al-Rayyan. Duji at the gate, sometimes even on the way here. My father is different or the same, of course. It's all prayer, this wild jockeying to the corner, pushing up, not out, then back down another. Again, prostration. How to say this? Sitting, co-founded by God. Assalamu alaikum. I note these days which direction the last drops of ablution drip. What foot goes first when putting back on my shoes? How the gate slams shut. Alhamdulillah.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you were here. Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you. How did it feel for you as someone, I mean, how did it feel for you?
Yeah, it was interesting to read the Arabic and experience the meaning of the Arabic words and the colloquialism of the words with the English, and to read English from right to left. You know, it's not something I've done before, but it changes the experience. I suppose it puts you in an uncomfortable position for someone who hasn't read that way before. And because I'm an English reader, I've kind of experienced what it's like to read from that way in English, but not in Arabic, which I can do. So yeah, it was really discombobulating, but that was the purpose, I suppose, part of the purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
And clear translanguaging, right? I mean, clear example of translanguaging.
Yes.
Absolutely. It seems like the doors are open. We used to think you wrote in one language, and then if you were lucky enough to be a 1%er, you might get translated into another language. But this whole disruption of what one and the other is, and the ways in which we can all cross, we could all find entry points, especially if we look to the forms from our ancestors, the language errors from our ancestors. I think this is all very productive tension that I find to be the most exciting part of contemporary literature today. Some of you may know the book, The Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz. He has lots of issues that we're not talking about in terms of his sexuality and things like that. But prior to those issues coming to the table, he was made famous because he wrote this beautiful book with seamless translanguaging, so many switches between Spanish, Dominican Spanish and English, and a lot of footnotes included if you wanted extra information about the history of the Dominican Republic and Haiti. It's an exemplary novel, I think, of contemporary translanguage courage. And I'll never forget when a colleague of mine, who shall remain nameless, in a field close to mine, said she hated the novel because she is monolingual in English and felt that it left her out. And I think that what's happening, especially for younger generations, is is a kind of reckoning with we're all left out, like no one, to decenter us all and to allow the bilingual voice to center itself for a little bit. So Nadir, you can read that poem and say, oh my God, that's, there's a little bit of me. I mean, as a Hebrew heritage speaker, I take great pleasure in seeing this productivity in the English language. And I don't have access to Hebrew, but I feel like the poem gives me permission to have more access to a script structure that I might not have otherwise felt I could contain in my world as a reader or thinker.
He's contained it as well in the form of the prayer, the actual, the formula of the prayer and how you perform it. That's what all those pauses are. So it's interesting how he's framed it within that. It's actually a prayer. You could describe it as being a prayer,
Wow, so cool. I'm hungry for more. So my challenge to all of us is to start filling in the gap. I think I'm going back to my form. Do you see 2 writing invitations on your screen? Yes? Okay, great. This is also on the handout that you may or may not have received. And again, if you want to have it on your own computer, Dawn will be happy to send it to you. I give you 2 invitations. It is noon. My invitation to you is to start something for about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll come back at 12:15 together. And you'll just write some notes. Follow up on the notes I encouraged you to write about mistakes, errors, failures, shaming in language, and joys, the happy accidents, the tavern and the caverns, the death and the dearths that come to mind. So if you just want to generate a list, that would be productive. The other would be to start with one of these forms, either one that I introduced to you, such as the pantoum or the ghazal, or any other forms that that you're familiar with. You just take the structure and try out a first stanza and see if you can set yourself up with something that could lend itself to meditation and repetition and return. So these are the 2 opportunities. I talked about them in reverse order, to start with the form or to start with a list of misunderstandings or mistakes or things that you have noticed that have come about through happy accidents or error. Below, I give you the structure of the villanelle. So if you're going to try the form in the handout, the line, the first stanza, this is like code. So that if I sometimes when I'm writing a villanelle, I'll put this on my paper, A1, B, A2, and the B lines all rhyme with each other. And the A1 and A2 are the repetition lines, and the A line is the rhyme. So A1 and A2 both rhyme with each other, and the B lines all rhyme. And because I want you to get writing, I'm not going to show you these fine examples by Dylan Thomas, very famous poem you may know, "Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night," or my very favorite poem by Elizabeth Bishop, "One Art." But these are examples, and you can see master, intent, disaster. She uses off rhyme or slant rhyme, fluster, spent, master. So you see intent, spent, and meant, and went, and continent, all these rhymes. And another tip I say to my students is to go to rhymezone.com. When you're looking for rhymes, it's an expansive resource for waking up language. And I think it's good for academic writers as well, to have more than what the first word that comes to mind. So keep this link handy for all your writing. It gives you, you put in any word and it'll give you synonyms, antonyms, things that sound like it with one syllable, multiple syllable rhymes, etc. So I'm sure because it's noon, some people may have to drift off, but if you can spend another 10 minutes with me now, free writing. And Nadir would like the handout. So maybe Dawn, you could just, we can all just take 10 minutes. You can stay here. I really believe in the power of co-writing. So if there's any questions, you put them in the chat, but and we'll answer it there. And I suggest that until 12:15, we mute ourselves and maybe even stop video and come back at 12:15, having generated something with no requirement for sharing. It's an invitation I'll give to you, but you don't worry about sharing at this point. You have been assigned to go free and write.